A brand new NHL season is upon us, which means it's time for standings predictions, which always go great and never age terribly. This video will focus on the Western Conference and the next video will be about the Eastern Conference. I'm going to present my predictions in the form of a tier list, which you can see on screen. From top to bottom, the 5 tiers are teams I think will win their division, followed by teams that will finish top 3 in their division, teams that will be competing for the wildcard spots, teams that are going to be competitive but they're not really going to be in the playoff mix, and then just the worst teams at the bottom. We're going to go one division at a time, starting with the Pacific. The Anaheim Ducks, surprise surprise, are gonna suck. There are definitely bright spots on this team. Progression from players like Trevor Zegras, Jamie Drysdale, and Mason McTavish, as well as Leo Carlsson's rookie season. And Lucas Dostal, I think, can take steps into solidifying himself as the starting goalie of this team for the future. And I like their additions of Radko Gudas and Alex Kaloran, adding more veteran experience to this young team. But while the future for this team is bright, the present, not so much. They're easily going to be one of the worst teams in the league. Next is the Calgary Flames, who I feel are one of the hardest teams to predict going into this season. A lot of their key players dropped heavily in production. Jacob Markstrom went from a Vezina candidate to having a save percentage under 900, and they still only missed the playoffs by 2 points. If just a few of the 17 overtime losses they had went the other way, they're in. But apart from trading Tyler Toffoli, their team looks pretty much the same going into this season. But if they can just get some better offensive production from their key players, and if Markstrom can not suck, there's a world where this team competes for a top 3 spot in the division. And maybe all this team really needed was a new head coach. I predict the Flames to be in the wildcard hunt. I think they're going to improve, but not drastically enough. Next is the Edmonton Oilers. The primary issue for the Oilers for the past couple of seasons has been goaltending. But Stuart Skinner had an amazing rookie season and solidified himself as a #1 goalie. And while Jack Campbell last year was abysmal, I think he's going to have a bounce back season and at least be average, which would be huge for this team. And of course we all know how offensively gifted they are, and adding Matthias Ekholm at last year's trade deadline does bolster up their defense. There isn't really much to say about a team as good as the Oilers are. I have them finishing #1 in the Pacific Division. Next up are the LA Kings. The Kings made one of the biggest trades of the offseason, acquiring Pierre-Luc Dubois from the Jets, giving them insane center depth with Anze Kopitar, Pierre-Luc Dubois, and Phillip Danault. The biggest question mark for this team is the goaltending, but last season they showed that they don't really need great goaltending to be a good team. They were top 3 in their division, despite how awful Jonathan Quick and Cal Peterson were, and once Phoenix Copley showed up and gave them league average goaltending, they continued to get better and then traded for Korpisalo. So I don't really mind that their goaltending is a little suspect, and given the depth that they have, I see the LA Kings once again finishing top 3 in their division. The San Jose Sharks are gonna be bad, and I don't really think I need to say more than that. I mean, they have some things to look forward to, such as William Eklund and maybe a Philip Zadina bounce back. But yeah, no surprise, this team's gonna be one of the worst in the league. There isn't really much more to say than that. The Seattle Kraken were one of the biggest surprises of last season. They had a 100-point season with sub-900 goaltending, and even made it past the first round of the playoffs because William Grubauer decided he was good again. But they proved that they can be a great team without good goaltending. They get offensive production from everywhere in their lineup. Matty Beniers is coming off of a Calder-winning rookie season, and he's going to get better, but I don't think the Kraken are going to reach the 100-point mark this season. And I also think they're going to end up back in the wildcard hunt. And while they made the playoffs pretty convincingly through the wildcard, I'm not really confident in saying that that's going to be the case this season, but they'll definitely be in the hunt. The Vancouver Canucks are a very interesting team. The biggest thing for this team is that Thatcher Demko is going to be healthy, and they have a decent backup in Casey DeSmith. Their defense has been questionable for a while, and they made some solid additions to it in Ian Cole and Carson Soucy, as well as Philip Hronik at the trade deadline last season. And their forward group has great offensive threats. Elias Pettersson, Andrei Kuzmenko, JT Miller, Brock Besser. I think this team can surprise a lot of people. I'm also a Canucks fan, so there's absolutely some bias here, but this team is definitely going to be able to compete for a playoff spot. The Vegas Golden Knights are coming off of a Stanley Cup victory. Their team isn't much different from that Stanley Cup winning team, so it's a no-brainer that they're going to be one of the top teams in their division. For me, they're #2 in the Pacific, but they could easily take the top spot again. Ivan Barbashev was a great pickup for them at the deadline. They've been able to keep him long-term on the roster, at the expense of Riley Smith. But other than that, like I said, the team is unchanged and they just won a cup. They're of course going to be great. Moving on to the Central Division, we're starting with the Arizona Coyotes. I think the Coyotes are going to have a pretty good season this year. Are they going to compete for the playoffs? No. But after a few seasons of being just awful, this season I don't think they're going to be completely awful. Clayton Keller is coming off of a career season and he's only 25. Logan Cooley has joined the team and he looks like he's going to be great. Matias Maccelli had a great rookie season and he's only going to get better. Same goes for JJ Moser. And their free agent signings in Jason Zucker, Alex Kerfoot, and Matt Dumba gives this team underrated roster depth. Again, I don't think this team is going to compete for the playoffs, but they aren't going to be an easy victory like they have been in previous seasons. The Chicago Blackhawks are going to be a must-watch team, not because they're going to be good, they're not, but because of Connor Bedard. And while he most likely will have a great season, I don't think it's going to be enough to get the Blackhawks out of the bottom tier. Peter Mrazek is still your starting goalie, and outside of Connor Bedard and Taylor Hall, this team just doesn't have a lot of talent. They do have some young players who can progress, like Lucas Reichel, Taylor Radish, and Boris Kachuk, so that'll also be pretty interesting to watch, but this team ultimately is still going to be one of the worst in the league. The Colorado Avalanche suffered many injuries last season, evident from the fact that they used 43 different players to get through the season, and despite that, they still finished barely at the top of their division. This year, even with a bunch of new players coming in, from Jonathan Drouin to Ryan Johansson, Miles Wood, Ross Colton, Thomas Tatar, this team is still just as talented as it has been for many years. I'm especially interested to see how Ryan Johansson and Jonathan Drouin play on this team. Their defense is still one of the best in the league, and Alex Georgiev had a shockingly good season given the year prior with the New York Rangers. The Avalanche are poised to be one of the best teams in the league this season, but I have them just barely missing out on the number 1 seed in the Central. That spot goes to the Dallas Stars. Last season, the Stars went on a run to the conference finals, and that was even with Jay Gartner playing pretty poorly in the playoffs. Jason Robertson had 109 points at just 23 years old. He's gonna get better. Wyatt Johnston had 24 goals in his rookie season at 19. He's gonna get better. Not to mention players like Rope Hintz, Joe Pavelski, Tyler Seguin, Jamie Benn, and the addition of Matt Duchene. The Dallas Stars have great forward depth, great defense, and a top-tier goalie. I think the Dallas Stars are going to win the Central Division this upcoming season. The Minnesota Wild, for the most part, look exactly the same. And given their $15 million in dead cap, it's not like they could have done much to improve the team. But the team as it is still plenty good enough to be a top 3 team in the Central Division. Their top 6 is incredible and they have a pretty good bottom 6 as well. Their defense is pretty solid even with losing Matt Dumba, although not having Spurgeon to start the season is gonna hurt. Philip Gustafsson had an amazing year in net for them. While it may be questionable if he can repeat that season, he's still gonna be really good. I have no doubt that the Minnesota Wild will end up in the top 3 in their division again. The Nashville Predators are an interesting team. By the end of the season, Matt Duchene, Ryan Johansson, and Philip Forsberg weren't even playing. And the team was still weirdly competitive despite having a bunch of rookies on the team, with standout players such as Philip Tomasino, Juuso Parssinen, and Luke Evangelista. And in the offseason, they lost Matt Duchene and Ryan Johansson, but added some pretty good players in Ryan O'Reilly, Gustav Nyquist, and Luke Schenn. And given how this team was still competitive without their main players playing at the end of the season, they can still be a competitive team this season. That being said, I don't really see them being a real threat to make the playoffs, despite how good of a goalie UC Saros is. The St. Louis Blues last season sold at the trade deadline, trading off Vladimir Tarasenko and Ryan O'Reilly. This season, the Blues have some pretty talented players on their roster. Obviously, you have Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou, but they also now have Kevin Hayes, in addition to Jakub Vrana, who they got last season, who's played pretty well for them. And then, of course, there are the players who have been on the roster for quite some time now. While this team can definitely be competitive, I don't really see them anywhere close to being a playoff team. Goaltending's an issue as Jordan Binnington has gotten worse every single season, and looking at most other teams in the division and in the Western Conference as a whole, they don't really have the talent to compete for a playoff spot, but they're not going to be a miserably bad team. The Winnipeg Jets had a lot of question marks going into the season. After the Blake Wheeler buyout and the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade, speculation about Mark Scheifele and Connor Hellebuyck arose, but both of them have now signed 7-year extensions, putting the speculations to rest. So for now, that speculation is no more. And the team looks pretty good. They acquired Gabriel Velarde for Pierre-Luc Dubois, and at 23 years old, coming off of a 20-goal season, he can be a part of the long-term plans for this team. Alex Iafallo is also a great addition to this forward group. Nikolai Ehlers is going to be healthy, and Cole Perfetti is going to have another season to progress. And of course, there's Kyle Connor and Mark Scheifele. Josh Morrissey just had a career year, so it'll be interesting to see how he follows that up. And of course, they still have one of the best goalies in the league in Connor Hellebuyck. This is a team that is definitely going to compete for a playoff spot this season. It didn't look that way with rumors of Scheifele and Hellebuyck being traded, but that has now been resolved. And those are my predictions for the standings in the Western Conference. If I had to derive standing orders from this tier list, it would look something like this. Let me know your predictions for the Western Conference in the comments below. Like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed. And stay tuned for the Eastern Conference predictions video, which will be out after this one. Thanks for watching.